You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
He started by saying he was surprised to see some of the names that stayed involved later in the game last week, some of the names that didn't get involved actually earlier, so it's a bit of both ways there. He was curious for your thoughts on how the coaches actually try to go about utilizing and experimenting with some of that depth in games like this. And do you think there are some position groups you'd point out that we'll see that rotation tighten up with in a big way over the next couple of weeks?
So Coach McGuire mentioned on his coaches show last week, and I think he actually talked about this after the game against UAPB, and he made the point, and I think it's a subtle nuance that you need to pay attention to when you're asking about this kind of question. I don't know how long this will last, but he did indicate, I want to be very intentional. And so the way this works is because I think people think the head coach or coordinator ultimately decides who's playing. And a lot of times this falls to the position coach. They decide who's in there and who – all these things, right? It just kind of, there's too much to manage, and they're the guys that are grading and evaluating, and that's their job, is like to decide, who's in and when are we subbing in and who's had a good week and all that, because it's a constant evaluation. But Joey made the point to say, I've told my staff I want them to be very intentional about when we start subbing in. I want Micah Hudson to be in, who backs up Reggie Virgil. I want him to be in with Caleb Douglas and Coy Aiken. When we put TJ West in, I want Reggie Virgil and Coy Aiken in. So like it's like a subtle sub. Same thing at corner. Same thing at safety. Like when we put Peyton Morgan in at one of those safeties, I want to make sure Cole Wisniewski's in right next to him. When we put Malika Scara in there, I want to make sure that Brendan Jordan is right next to him. Yeah. So like so that may have looked a bit different to some. It wasn't just like put the second team in. I guess is the point. It was that
stood out to me too. Like some of the combos we saw, and you mentioned that, and I sort of forgot. I'm sorry, I wasn't listening closely.
No, it's good.
But you did mention that last week.
I think you're trying to take care of your second team guys and give them a fair shot. Now there is a save it for the second half if we just want to make a wholesale change and like get the twos and the threes in there, all that stuff. As far as like shrinking positions or rotations or whatever on something like that, I think there's an ebb and a flow to that. I think that they are going to be very intentional about. I would tell you, like, because didn't you say that the mobster was asking about like secondary and receiver specifically?
Yeah, I think those are where at least we perceive some of the competitions to be ongoing. Maybe the O-line. You could point out something else we might be missing, but. Yeah, those two groups specifically.
Kicker. Yeah. We talked about that. I think you feel very good about. I think you feel like you may have some graded above the others, and you do, but you feel like ultimately you feel really strong about four corners that you would start and not miss a beat. Dante Balfour did not play in the opener, so keep in mind there. Amir Boyd, Mo Horn's going to be suspended for the first half of this game on Saturday. So guess what? You're going to get Bryce Pollock and you're going to get Amir Boyd. And then we'll see, because my question would be, if Dante Balfour is not back yet, who is your third corner? Because Macho Stevenson was not available last week. And now you're into your, let's see, you're into your like, okay, who would be like, you've got two of your top four, but now we're going to go to like who's the sixth best corner as the third corner in this scenario? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So just throwing that out there, like I don't think it's a big problem for Kent State, but it is worth mentioning to you now as you look at rotation and shrinking and all those things. But I do think that you would play all four of those guys in any kind of game that you want to throw out there. I do think Bryce Pollock is by far your best corner. We've said this all along. He's an NFL prospect. I think he grades above every other corner you've got, and then there's a gap. But those other three are very close, and of a group. Now, safety, I think that's interesting because you go from experienced and older to just very young and talented with those 3 red shirts. But you're going to have to play more than 2 safeties all year. That's just the way it's going to go. And so those three freshmen, redshirt freshmen that are very talented and that were highly recruited and all the things, they're going to get some opportunities. So I think there's a happy medium on shrinking that rotation or not, because I think you've got to play a 3rd and a 4th guy, and you may get into a 5th guy and all those things. So I don't necessarily know if we'll see those rotations shrunk. I do think you could see some 80-20, 90-10 scenarios where, like, man, Bryce Pollock needs to play all these snaps. There's 75 plays in a game. Yeah. I want my best guy out there. Okay, so there's that. Receiver-wise, that'll shrink a bit, but at what level? You're still going to play 8, 9, 10 wideouts, in a game. But again, your Douglases, your Aikens, your Virgils, those guys are going to play the ball. But so is John Carlos, and so is Terrence Carter. So is Roy Alexander. And what have I listed off right there? 7 or 8. So there's some room there for the behind those guys, for Micah Hudson, for a Kelby Valson, for a TJ West. But there's not a ton of room. Because we're trying to win a conference championship. If you're Joey McGuire, and so you're not, and you're Juice Johnson over there, and it's like, I don't want Reggie Virgil or Caleb Douglas standing over there next to me just too much. Right. I mean, and Coy Aiken too. So.
First, today's episode brought to you by Upside. Red Raider fans, are you still paying full price for gas? Stop leaving money behind and get real cash back every time you fill up with the free Upside app. Just download the free Upside app in the App Store or Google Play Store right now and start earning cash at the pump today. And you can use our limited time promo code FOOTBALL and get an extra 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. You can make up to $300 a year just from buying the gas you already needed. You might think it's too good to be true, but it's totally legit. Real people are getting paid just to make their daily commutes, and you can too. Plus, you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. So don't let this offer drive on by. Download the free Upside app now and use our limited time promo code FOOTBALL for a limited time 20-cent per gallon bonus. That's our promo code FOOTBALL for a limited time 25-cent per gallon bonus. Offers vary by user and location. Go to upside.com for terms and conditions. Yeah, some of those spots kind of lend themselves more to not really seeing it shrink dramatically, of course, as compared to some of the others. But you hopefully will still have time to continue to tinker, or whatever way you want to describe it, with what you're trying to get lined out over these next couple of weeks. This is, as I've already said, in all due respect, podcast, so we overlook no opponent, but it's Kent State coming to town Saturday morning, so I'm hoping for ample garbage time to see your legs stretched roster wise, just like you had last time around. Chris, before we get out of here, I do want to make a hard left with you just for entertainment's sake for just a moment. I'm curious if you've paid any attention to the conversation ongoing between a pair of dueling head coaches, one of those in the Big 12 Conference that are going to be squaring off coming up, that being Mike Gundy and Dan Lanning, Oregon and Oklahoma State, soon to get together. And I guess it started with Mike Gundy essentially bemoaning the state of college football right now. He's mad about the cash and the NIL, which is weird because he used to have one of the biggest cash cows at his behest, but that's another story. Dan Lanning had a great response. Gundy's trying to put something forth about, like, hey, we should have more equal NIL budget matchups in the non-conference. Lanning said something to the effect of, I'm sure that Tennessee Tech or whoever it was, UT Martin, didn't have a similar one, and they still played that game. And Lanning succinctly pretty much said some are invested in winning, some aren't, and they use that as an excuse as to why they don't, which was a bit of a capper to me. But I was kind of curious if you were paying attention to this, and I just wanted to ask in general, for the Big 12 Conference specifically, not the SEC, not the Big 10, not everybody, but for the Big 12 Conference, mixing it up a little bit like this, good for the league, you think? What's your reaction?